Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hi, this is Emily Swallow, the armorer in The Mandalorian. You're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. This is the way.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we have a discussion of the 7th episode of The Acolyte coming up. But before we dive into that, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Sure thing. You can always find us very easily on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we'll be doing a full spoiler review of episode 7, which is called Choice. But before we get into the spoiler details, we'll kind of give our non-spoiler reactions and give you all an opportunity to decide whether you want to stick with us or not, or if you haven't watched it, go watch it first. But Jay, I'll let you go first. What did you think about this episode overall?
Overall, I would have to give it a C. And we will definitely get into why, but I would say that the strong aspect of this particular episode was the lightsaber stuff, the lightsaber battles, and the acting in general. I just really have to give kudos to the actors for their portrayals of these roles. But there were some things that I feel like could have definitely been handled more succinctly that left us. I don't know how they're going to resolve this in the finale. And I guess maybe we'll all go, that's what this was all leading towards. But I need to get into it with you, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now.
Okay.
What about you?
So I enjoyed it much more on the second viewing than I did the first. So I after I had watched it the second time, I had an opportunity to adjust my expectations and then pay attention or more attention to some of the things that happened. And it's not that I didn't like it the first time, but I'm not sure that I want to say I was underwhelmed. It just I wasn't really majorly impressed with the episode. The second time through, when I paid attention to some of the stuff, I was like, okay, this was actually pretty good. Again, not my favorite episode of the series. And this episode itself doesn't vault this up my rankings, and I don't even know what those rankings are of Star Wars and Disney Plus, but I did like it more. There were some very thought-provoking things that happened in there and some interesting story decisions that they made on this. But yeah, there were some interesting story decisions here that I'm looking forward to getting into with you on this. And I'm very eager to see how this plays out in the finale when we get back. Non-spoiler, you watch the first few seconds of this episode and you see that it takes 16 years in the past. So it's, similar to episode 3 and this, but I'll be interested to see what they do with all this when we get to the finale and what that means for the characters. Because, anyways, that does it for the non-spoiler section of this. Let's dive into some details. It was just getting too hard to talk about this in non-spoiler capacity.
It is.
All right. So like I said, this episode starts off at 16 years in the past, back on Brendok, and we find out that our Jedi, so Sol, Andara, Kanelka, and Torbin are there because they've been assigned to investigate the planet. 100 years before, it was a victim of one of the emergencies that Vinyl created, which I thought was a really cool touch.
Yes, definitely.
it had become a lifeless planet. And now it's teeming with life, but as far as they know, there's no one living there. And Torbin is grousing about this. He's still a Padawan. And Soul says, we're looking for virgins in the Force. And this is a very noble mission. And that's why we're spending so much time here. So virgins is a very powerful Star Wars word that we know. What do you think about that notion?
Well, like you, I thought it was a really awesome touch that they mentioned the hyperspace disaster
Mm-hmm.
and, that we know from Light of the Jedi. And so, of course, my ears perked up there right away. But what I did appreciate about this portion of it was just the fact that, sometimes Jedi have to go on some really non-glamorous kinds of missions. I mean, they're collecting samples, they're analyzing samples, they're trying to figure out what's going on, and you could just tell Torbin, being very homesick for Coruscant, was just so sick of it, and
Mm-hmm.
he was longing for maybe more adventure. I don't know, but he was just done, and so he just wanted to do everything and anything that he could to get back to Coruscant, which part of me wonders why. I mean, was it simple homesickness, or was there more of a reason? Not any kind of nefarious reason, but was there just another reason why he was so wanting to get back? Or did he just think it was just that non-glamorous?
He reminded me a bit of Reese Silas in that way. Reese
Oh, yeah.
wanted to be back in the archives at the
Mhm.
Jedi Temple, and being out in the field was just not for him. That's what I got out of Torbin. That was my impression of Torbin, is that he was sick of camping. He was sick of eating Nunas that Kelnaka was making. And that was a funny joke when he said that, and Kelnaka kind of
Yes.
growled, and Dara's like, it's not wise to insult a Wookiee's cooking.
Mhm.
So there was that. And yeah, he didn't like roughing it. He is someone who I think had grown accustomed to the temple life.
Yeah.
And even that's not particularly glamorous, but it's not roughing it out in the woods
Mhm.
either. And
Yeah.
so, that was a weakness for him. And
Mhm.
it's something that ends up playing a role later in this episode.
Mhm.
But yeah,
Well,
but
yeah. I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, address your question about the virgins because I
Yeah.
hadn't talked about that at all. But yes, I mean, we know virgins in the forest just means something that is very rare and something that creates things where something had not existed before. And it's such a powerful force, essence kind of a thing. But part of me wondered if there was any remnants of something like the Drangir there, with all
Mm.
the life. And, because there was those what were those nanomoths or whatever in the last episode that were just kind of like these weird kind of morphed sort of creatures, but I didn't know if there was any connection whatsoever to something like that.
We're talking about the Umber Moths
Umber moss, yes, that's what they were. Thank
that
you.
were on Kofar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the thing is that one of the reasons why that caught my attention so much is that, of course, the other place that we really talk about a vergence of the Force is the Phantom Menace.
Hmm.
And Qui-Gon is convinced that he's encountered a vergence of the Force, and then Yoda asks him around a person, and he believes it's to be Anakin. And of course, we know that Anakin doesn't have a father, that
Hmm.
something was created. Similarly, we were teased back in episode 3 that May and Osha were created by Mother Anastasia, and then Mother Cairo gave birth to them. And so, and they were talking about, what would the Jedi think if they knew about how you created them? And, that comes up again in this episode. And so, they kind of dropped that right off on the bat. And I was like, oh, okay. Because we've all been wondering what was a story about Osha and May, where they came from. I mean, we kind of put that aside after other events have kind of predominated or dominated the story over the past few episodes. But now here it is again. And I can see why. I thought when we heard that was going to get all of the Jedi interested, but it was really Soul that became obsessed with this detail, that, especially, and the girls in general.
Mhm.
And so, that'll, we can put a pin in that, because that's going to come up. Actually, no, let's just get into it now. We Later in the episode, we get to the post testing the girls on the Jedi ship, and Torbin had taken a blood sample and he analyzed it, and the results come back that they have an extremely high M count, midichlorian
Mhm.
count, and that they are very, very force sensitive. And not only that, they have an identical symbiont. And Indara goes out to point out that, oh, so that verifies they're twins. And he's like, no, twins would have like similar ones, but these are exactly identical. And
Hmm.
so the only way that this could get created is through a vergence in the force, is what Soul says.
So what I was thinking when all of this was happening
Mm-hmm.
also was, could they have just been clones of each other
Mm-hmm.
that were created by Mother Anastasia et al.? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's clearly not the case here. That there's, we know that there's some sort of, they're convinced that the only way that this is possible to create this like purely identical symbiont. Because I don't even think, I'm not exactly sure what they mean by symbiont in this case. I mean, that seemed like a concept that may have been invented for this, or did you have a different idea on that?
Well, my understanding of a symbiont is something that depends on something else for life and vice versa. It's a give and take kind of thing to sustain life.
Yeah, and that didn't make sense to me in this context.
Right, because even Qui-Gon says that in Phantom Menace about the midichlorians. He said they're symbiotic.
Mm-hmm.
They live in our bodies, and so that's the way that he put it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yeah, this was all kinds of confusing.
Right. And so I was trying to figure out what exactly that meant. Did that mean the midichlorians are identical? They have a different, identical midichlorian structure, and that not everyone does. That's something I think like could have used a little bit more explanation here. But the takeaway from this is that the fact that they were exactly identical was, sent up a flag for the
Mhm.
Jedi here, and that the only way that this could be accomplished is through a vergence in the Force. So yeah, so they've got identical symbionts. This could only be accomplished through a vergence in the Force. And the other thing about this is that it kind of, you know, brought the whole little thing that May and Osha were saying together. It added meaning to that. You are me, you're with me, I'm with you. Always one, but born as two. As
Mhm.
above sit the stars, and below lies the sea. I give you you, and you give me me. And so, it's just like I feel like this is something that the witches. I mean, this is more than just about them being twins.
Mhm.
They are the same like entity, the same
Right.
being on this. They've just been split into by this vergence or whatever the witches did to it.
Right.
And so, it's kind of struck me that there wasn't even more made of that by the Jedi. And I'm wondering if this is something that's not being left for the season finale next week.
And that could very well be. And I'm wondering too if this just isn't something that they don't, as of yet, have much experience with. But, fast forward to Kylo Ren and Rey, the idea of the dyad.
Mhm.
Obviously, the two of them did not have these exact symbionts, but then again, nobody ever took their blood samples. You know what I mean? So we know that they're not like identical twins or anything like that, but they definitely they were virgins as well. They
Mhm.
had to be. So, that's where my mind kind of went, is this sort of the beginnings of where the idea of the dyad may have come from.
Yeah. For me, it seems like I can see why this would be alarming to the Jedi. It's that if this truly was these witches taking advantage of a vergence to create this life, well, then you create these two powerful force beings with these ultra high midi chlorians. That is cause for alarm. But then the other thing about this is, at the end of the episode, the witches have been wiped out. We find it's not from the fire. It's from Endara freeing Kelnaka, and they were all apparently invested in that process. And the council had already said that you can't interfere anymore. You can't bring the girls back to Coruscant. We're not going to train them. But Inadara intercedes and says, "No, we can't do that. We're going to take them." And this Osha's lost everything. So why would we take her dream away from her too? Then she comes after Soul for some other things like that. So the four of them created a little cover up. So I don't think the
Mhm.
rest of the Jedi know about this.
Yeah.
That there
Yeah.
was this vergence here. That we have this, these two little girls that were extremely powerful in the Force. And if they had, because the test results weren't in yet when Indar got the news back from the Council on this.
Mhm.
How if that would have changed anything?
Yeah, and and that's one of the reasons why, as much as this episode, like I said, I just think that the acting was amazing by all involved, but there's just so many weird loose ends that I don't know either number 1, are they gonna be able to tie up? But it's confusing in a lot of ways, which I guess is maybe the point, to all of this. But, the one of the things that doesn't sit well with me is the fact that why would Mother Anastasia be so okay with Osha leaving if they were trying to keep this whole coven very secretive and covered up because obviously Mother Coral was all about not wanting to let either one of them go. And they obviously knew about the Jedi. The Jedi had no idea that there was any life on Brendok, let alone this coven. And so these women must have come from somewhere else originally to even have any knowledge of Jedi. So I
Oh,
know those
sure.
are, you know what I mean? Those are
Yeah,
kind of
they didn't originate on
discombobulated
this planet.
thoughts.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they all came to this planet as a haven.
Uh-huh.
That's to me, that's not even an open issue.
Yeah, because they talked about their stronghold being an old mining facility.
Right. And as far as Mother Anastasia, I actually like that part of the episode because, she's there, she's the mother, she's the leader of this coven. And, the witches all say, hey, you're not just a mother of these two little girls, you're our leader. And she retorts back, I choose to be a mother right now
Mhm.
between the two. The other witches were protesting about Osha being able to leave because for whatever reason, May and Osha are extremely important to their future. We don't have that answer yet. I don't know if we ever get the answer, but I loved the role of a parent that Anastasia takes on. And she's like, in this moment, I take on, I choose to be a mother. And, she'd already told Osha, it's like, we're going to decide whether or not you can go or not, but we'll take your wish into account. And then it turns out that she had decided to let Osha go. But unfortunately, that scene played out the way it did. And she got killed before, that could communicate directly to Osha or anything else that happened there.
So
So,
I wanna interrupt you for just a
sure.
second. So when that all happened
Hmm.
and Mother Anastasia started turning herself into this black kind of sandy, smoky entity, and she was
Hmm.
doing the same to Osha, what the heck was that? I mean, I know it was witch's magic or whatever, but I mean, that is just taking living particles and then turning them into something completely different, which I guess is the point because that's what they do
Hmm.
is create and destroy life. But
Yeah, Mother Chiral did the same thing later,
right,
and she was
yeah.
kind of like a teleportation. She used it to get from one place to another. I in with that as the context, I think Anastasia, because it was actually May that was standing there at
Oh,
that time,
yes. Yeah, you're right.
that she was going to take herself and May elsewhere, and Soul
And
didn't
that's when
understand
May
what was
witnessed
happening.
it. Mhm.
Right, because May was pleading for help because she just set this fire, and Osha was in trouble, and so I think she was going to take them elsewhere and rescue Osha, but Soul didn't understand what was going on and drew his lightsaber and stabbed her and killed her that way.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that was my reading of that.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit too about the witches and their force powers over both Torbin and then later Kalnaka.
Hmm.
What did you make of that?
Well, it was interesting, based on the roundabout answer way of answering your question. Based on what's happened in the previous episodes, we've seen all these Jedi carrying guilt, with the exception of maybe of Indara, and I can kind of see why she didn't feel as guilty given her actions and all of this compared to the other three. That so they've been carrying all this guilt, and I was under the impression that the Jedi had done something terribly in the wrong. But this episode shows that there's a lot of misunderstandings, and a lot of people made mistakes that led to the ultimate finality of this. And I think Soul and the Jedi invade the fortress, which was a wrong when it happened. But Anastasia's response to that when she invaded Torbin's mind, because he was like the most susceptible of the four of them there, and was promising him, she's is promising slash like planting a suggestion in his mind that the way to get home, his desire is to get home, and the way to accomplish that is through the witches, that they can make his desire come true. And So they prey upon that, and then later Kelnaka shows up, and it takes all of them to overcome Kelnaka.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all sitting there in rows, clutching hands. All their eyes have gone black. They're swaying back and forth and kind of humming / singing to make that happen. Because Kelnaka was a much more strong-willed individual. At least why I took
Mhm.
it. But what'd you think?
Oh, yeah, that's totally how I took it too. And just quick aside, that whole sequence of lightsaber battle was fantastic. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, like I was saying, the bright spot in this episode for me was definitely the choreography and just seeing the lightsaber battle. Although it was somewhat less believable that Torbin was able to even in any way, shape, or form, be able to fend off some of Kelnaka's blows, especially the one where his wrist was kind of sideways.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's I know that's for the storytelling, neither here nor there. But what's ironic is, and here's another spoiler for anyone who has not read the High Republic comics, is that there's that Children of the Storm
Mm-hmm.
that are able to do kind of the same thing where they invade the mind of a force user and they're able to create hallucinations and
Mm-hmm.
basically control their minds. So, is this kind of maybe one of those, as we've talked about with the High Republic, these, one of these force sects very similar to, the Nile that could potentially be using the force in this way?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, the other tie, obviously, to now that we've noticed is that they both put markings on their foreheads,
Right.
and the markings that the Nile have evolved. It was waves, and then it was lightning
Mhm.
bolts, and now it's when you get into phase 3, it's the blue eye that's up there.
Right.
Well, an eye can easily become a circle. Why not?
Sure.
So there's that possibility. I guess the difference is that the Children of the Storm are other Force users that have been corrupted by Bulan, that
True. Yeah.
deranged scientist, to do what
Mhm.
they do. Now, who's to say one of them didn't survive, recover, and then have offspring that's led to this? But I don't know that necessarily would have spread to an entire coven of witches.
Mhm.
Um,
Point
but
taken. Mhm.
yeah, well, I mean, you're right to wonder about the connections in all these things because they certainly are drawing them there. And uh, we got that. Like we just said, we got that reference to the emergencies from the hyperspace disaster right off the top of this episode. So that who's to say there isn't
Yeah.
more? I don't know whether they'll actually highlight that for us or not. I doubt it by the end of the series, but there's been talk of potential second season for the Acolyte. So
Mhm.
we'll see what
Mhm.
happens there.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this question. We see an awful lot of things happen in this episode. Who do you think is at fault in all this for the way things that ultimately went down here?
I think it was just a perfect storm of bad decisions, quite
Mhm.
honestly. And it was, as you said, when Sol and Torben went into the stronghold, they probably shouldn't have done that. Sol was so, as you said, obsessed with these twins and just not leaving well enough alone, which, his intentions were good. But, as Indara said, like, who are you doing this for? Are you doing it? There's a difference between what you want and what is right or something of that nature.
Mhm.
Um, I can't remember the exact quote. I know you have it in here somewhere, but at any rate, and then there's, Torben wanting to get back to Coruscant so badly that he feels like, well, if we get these twins, that's his ticket home. So
Mhm.
there's that, and then so there's just all of these different things that are happening in this perfect storm. And then, ultimately Soul has to almost like a Sophie's choice, when he's got both of the twins on that broken bridge suspended, that they're both crying out to him, and then he ends up what he thinks is just saving Osha over May.
Mhm.
And so there's so many different little things in this wheel that just keep spinning and spinning and spinning that I don't know that it's that you can really point a finger necessarily of blame. Just like with anything, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Right.
And I think that that's just what's in every path of this story. That's basically what you're looking at. But what do you think?
Well, at one point, Anastasia says, was it to Saul? It's like, one day your noble intentions will be the death of every Jedi in the galaxy.
Yeah.
And she's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly what happens 100 years later. Um,
Mhm.
but okay, so yeah, I mean, we can break it down. To me, the least culpable person in all this was Kelnaka. he's,
Yeah.
he's on the planet doing his job, and I feel like he just kind of gets led from one place to another. But he doesn't actually raise any objections to this either. So, if there's
Mhm.
guilt to be had by the Jedi, he's guilty by, association for all that. And
Sure.
he's implicated in all that. Then you've got Torbin, and he is very impulsive about his desire to leave, but that's been stoked by Anastasia preying on that desire.
Mhm.
So that mitigates some of his blame, but it doesn't excuse him. And I know I was kind of saying that, perhaps Indara carries the least amount of guilt of the Jedi, or whether that's justified or not. But, she has this conversation with Saul earlier in the episode that Torbin's expressed his desire to return to Coruscant. He wants to leave. They've been there for 7 weeks. And then Indara and Saul are having this conversation. And Soul says he was disturbed, unbalanced, and Indara's response was, "You were disturbed. Do not confuse Torbin's feelings with your own. I do not tell him answers to ease his mind. I teach him to seek the answers for himself."
Mhm.
And then she challenges him, like, "You disagree? Well, that's why I have a Padawan, and you do not."
Hmm.
And there's something to that. And I'm sure as a teacher, this. It's you can give people answers, but they learn it best when they figure it out for themselves. When
Right.
they see the answers. But is this one of those times?
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, isn't a certain amount of judgment needed for that? What do you think?
Exactly. Well, and again, like you said, it comes down to it's almost like a form of parenting as well. You've got your authoritarian parent, which I think Indara probably very much is. You know what I mean? Like she wants things to be done a certain way. And even though she leaves things open for her Padawans, if you want to put it that way, for interpretation, she has a very strict way of going about it with not a whole lot of wiggle room.
Mhm.
And, so yeah, it's hard to say because I mean, yes, I do feel as a teacher there's times where you just need to say this is how you need to do this for safety, for you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
there's reasons why you might just want to cut to the chase on certain things instead of always going at it by, the Socratic method or whatever.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and then, I mean, Indara was very, very willing to just cover the whole thing up, with
Yeah.
at the end too, even with the way that she was coaching Soul to give Osha the answers, there was a May set a fire, kind of a thing. She started a fire, and that was it. And yeah, I mean, from a certain point of view, she did start the fire, but she didn't mean to start that big of a fire. It was to make a point, and it ended up going sideways.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, Indara tells Soul, when, Soul says, "Hey, let's, we want to test the children." And Indara's like, "Hey, that's a great way. That's a great delay tactic. We're going to test them, but we have no intention of taking them with us. And it's a great way to buy us time to get advice from the council." And then, later, she chastises Soul's like, "Yeah, OSHA passed the test, but that's only after you coached her. You've
Yeah.
interfered with, whether she was lying or not, you interfered with all of that."
Mhm.
But at that point, it's like, and I agreed with her at that point. You've interfered. You shouldn't have done this. This is, the Jedi have their rules. And this is what gets the Jedi in trouble all the time. They stop following the rules. Whether we agree with them or not, if they'd followed the rules when it came to Anakin, do we have the the tragedy of the Jedi of the prequels? And
Right.
now we have another tragedy here because these 4 Jedi elected not to follow their rules, and they disobeyed the council on that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's that. And then, Soul in this, he discovers these 2 children, and he becomes infatuated with them after he sees May use the Force and that. And he gets suspicious, and then he does start forming an attachment. Did that work for you? How quickly he formed this attachment to these kids?
Well, I think for Soul, he just is a very intense Jedi.
Mhm.
But, I step back and I look at him in the same way that I look at Qui-Gon. You brought up the whole thing with Anakin. I mean, how different really is he from Qui-Gon in that Qui-Gon instantly became obsessed with Anakin,
Mhm.
in that he thought that this was the chosen one. I mean, he basically said this virgin centers around a person, it's this kid, and then he was doing everything in his power, even using force tricks and manipulating chance cubes to be able to get him back to Coruscant. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you talk about coaching. I mean, it's kind of a mirrored situation there, but it's just that Soul is portrayed a little bit more passionately, which I think is, and Dara calls him right out on it and says, don't alter this girl's destiny just because you form this emotional attachment to her.
Mhm. Hey, no, yeah, the difference I think is that the light that these 2 have been presented in the Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon is getting the best of someone who's greedy,
Hmm.
and he's doing things for this other end, which is to get to the Queen to Coruscant so they can put an end to the invasion of Naboo. We don't have that here in
Right.
this episode here. It is Soul, uh, you know, becoming obsessed with this idea about these girls and their abilities in the Force, and that he's got a concern that some dark ritual is going to do something to these girls. Well, the Ascension ritual happened for May,
Hmm.
and we don't necessarily see her any worse for wear, or but the difference between her and Osha is that she wants to stay with the Coven and take her rightful place as a leader someday, whereas
Hmm.
Osha wants to leave and do her own thing. And so, I mean, Soul, I think, very deservedly bears a lot of guilt for what happened here.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
because if they had never landed on Brendok,
mhm,
this would have just all happened with them being unawares. And who's to say that there's not hundreds of these types of covens all over the galaxy, or
mhm,
different types of civilizations like this that have ascension type, sorts of ceremonies and whatnot. And you can't go around and save all of them, Soul.
yeah.
You can't just go and intervene in every single culture just because you think it's the quote unquote best thing.
I just kind of wonder what would have happened if, after they got the blood test results, they had then waited for the council. They informed the council of that and then got advice
Hmm.
about it. And instead, Torbin's like, "Hey, this is our ticket off the." He blames well.
Yeah.
He bears a lot of guilt on this. He may have been
Yeah.
inexperienced, but that rush to, it's like, this is our ticket out of here. He doesn't even hide it. It's like, we
No.
go get the girls and we can go back to Coruscant. This is our ticket out of here.
Yeah.
That's almost
He
a
was
direct quote
desperate.
on this. But so, when episode 3, we did not see Soul's involvement with May and Osha when they were standing on that platform that was collapsing. We only saw him rescue Osha at the end.
Hmm.
This episode reveals that he was there the entire time, holding
Right.
them both up to the Force, but then made a decision to let May fall so he could rescue Osha.
And that's what I'm saying. The Sophie's choice comes
Yeah.
in.
So, uh, what did you think about that overall?
It's I'm very torn
Hmm.
about that. I mean, I understand that, if his strength was faltering and he had to at least save one, then I understand that, yes, you have to make a decision in that. But then it's just, wow. I mean, that was just so powerful that just it didn't sit well with me. I'm not going to lie.
Hmm.
It was hard. It was hard to watch.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I don't envy him the
No.
choice. It's, do you save one of them or none of them?
Right.
When it comes down
Exactly.
to it. But at the same time, you know, here's the result of this. May just said, Osha, a couple episodes ago, that the Jedi brainwashed you. And in a way they did. They
Mhm.
they convinced Osha that May set the fire. Now, May started a fire, but that's not what killed everybody. And when she lost control of it, she panicked and tried to get help for
She
all this.
did. Mhm.
It was not the malicious act of trying to kill. I took it as not the malicious act of trying to kill Osha so much as it was trying to destroy Osha's journal as some petty act of retribution. And then she lost control of what she
Exactly.
did.
Yeah, because you could tell that whatever that was in that accelerant or whatever, the
Hmm.
fuel that was in there was just spreading so quickly, and it just got out of control very, very fast. And then being a mining facility, who knows what kinds of things were able to get caught on fire down there.
Yeah, ancient technology that did not react well to whatever short circuits were started in that
Yeah.
console there. And then, we saw those explosions and everything that happened. Hey, but we were right. It was not the fire that killed the witches. That was obvious from episode 3.
Yeah.
And that obvious here too. So,
It was like a force blowback kind of a
mhm,
thing.
yeah. Okay, I gotta
Backdraft.
tell you, I mean, having talked about this episode, I like it more than when we first started talking about it, just getting an opportunity to talk about the story elements and what it means with the convergence of the Force. I have some sympathy for Soul because to me, this kind of adds some clarity to what when Torbin says we did what we thought was right back in the second episode before he takes the poison and kills himself. Is here's from Soul's perspective, he finds these Force sensitive children. You've got a coven of witches, which he suspects are using the dark side, and have manipulated the Force to create these children in the first place. And not just manipulated the Force, they manipulated a convergence of the Force, like the most powerful essence of the Force there is. What have they created? What's the danger? What needs to be done? And he got put in a position where he had to make an impossible choice, and he made it. So he's been living with that guilt ever since. But he still made bad decisions along the
Mm-hmm.
way. But
Yeah.
he's human at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. This whole
so
experience messed Torbin up big time.
mhm. Yeah, and then Torbin was acting out of a place of self-interest. He didn't, which was different from Soul. Torbin was, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And these two girls spawned from a convergence of the Force. That's my ticket off this planet. Consequences
Mm-hmm.
be damned.
Yep. Yeah.
So
And then he's the one that takes the Barash vow, which is, you would think if anybody that Soul would have, you know what I mean? Just because,
they
but
all
then
could have.
again, oh yeah,
Yeah.
very easily, except for Kalnaka. I mean,
Hmm.
I mean, I guess he could have, but yeah, but I still stick with my C rating only because the fact that as much as I appreciate, me, I love good backstory. I always say that,
Hmm.
but and being able to see it from the Jedi perspective and from that different point of view, I do think that they could have tidied this up and maybe condensed it a little bit more and then given us a little bit more of May and Osha's current reaction to it. You know what I mean? Which
I think
maybe we're
that's
going to
coming
get
next
that.
week.
Yeah, but then what about Kamir? I mean, what about like everything else? I mean, how long is the runtime for this finale? Do we even know?
No, but I also know that we've been in the position with finales for several other seasons of the upper episodes. Like they got a lot to do,
True.
and they
That's
end up
true.
getting to a lot of it. They wrap it up. Sometimes there's a few things left over that we don't have an answer on, but I took this episode to be Soul's explanation to May as what happened.
Hmm.
And so it's very possible when the finale starts, we get her reaction to that right
Hmm.
then.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish this episode then would have went just a little bit longer. I mean, I know I'm
Yeah.
not the decision maker on that, but I don't know. There's just and again, talking about it has definitely helped out a lot.
Mhm.
But just when I thought, like I was saying last week, I'm liking the show more and more. This one slipped back just a little bit for me.
Mm.
And there were some definite bright spots in this, but it just left me not very satisfied. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, that's
But
cool. I understand. I think for me, what I found is that the series, my reaction to the series as a whole has gotten better with each episode and as more of the story is filled out,
uh-huh. I
which
agree.
is not really an excuse for earlier episodes not to be satisfying. But on the one hand, I also think that it's kind of like these episodes don't necessarily all stand alone. They really are reliant on the other episodes. So maybe the final episode will, yeah. And I'm not asking you to change your grade. Your actions is perfectly justified in this case, but perhaps the final episode will improve this for you. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I honestly feel like I need to go back and binge all 7 and then just go right into the finale,
Mm,
just to kind of get just to have it hit just right. in order for me to go very from a continuity standpoint, I guess, because that's one thing about the fact that getting these episodes once a week, I love, just because the fact that sometimes when you binge and it's all out there at once, then there's tons of spoilers and you just can't avoid any of them. And that does really promote that water cooler kind of, fandom, where every week it's like, oh, what's going to happen next? And how are they going to do this? And so it really does offer a lot of really good discourse and discussion. But then again, it's so disjointed in a lot of ways that I'm going to need to put the pieces of the puzzle together, I think, before this finale. So I'm probably just going to sit down and binge the whole thing again.
So to your point, it's okay for a show to have the mysteries running in the background.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Obviously, definitely. But compare this to the season 1 of Mandalorian. And the Mandalorian, we got the mystery of Grogu, right off the bat. And while we all wondered about it, it wasn't reliant on resolving that mystery by the end of the season for us to enjoy the week-to-week stories and for us to enjoy speculating about what was going on with Grogu. And so this series kind of suffers, I think, by comparison, because it's completely reliant on all of that.
Yes, that's a good point.
When it's not as satisfying, then the show kind of suffers overall. So, yeah, I mean,
great.
I like this show for a lot of reasons. I like that it's taking risks and giving us this type of Star Wars story that we haven't got before. I mean, The Mandalorian is straight out of the George Lucas Book of Imagination. This takes what George Lucas did and puts a different type of twist on it. And I applaud them for taking that risk. It may not work completely, but I like the attempt.
No, I totally agree with you. I do. And, and like I said, I think that the choreography and the lightsaber fights in this are really top notch.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
for sure. I mean,
Can't complain about those.
Kudos to everybody involved in all of that. I just think that it's fantastic. Now, I do have one question.
Sure.
I was thinking a lot more about Kamir, and I've been dwelling on the line that he said that it was a very long time ago that he was a Jedi. Do you think that maybe he was created as well by even perhaps this coven and then set aside?
Well, I mean, I don't really have any way of answering that. I think, though, it was a really long time ago. I can't help but wonder if we're maybe reading a little too much into that line. It's, he was
it was Twilight. How long have you been 17? A long time.
Yeah, I haven't seen Twilight, but I think I understand your reference there. I think he's older than Osha, older than May. So for him to be a Jedi a really long time ago, he may have been kicked out when he was 6, and they would not have had any way of knowing who he was.
That's true. Yeah, and again, that's another mystery that hopefully we will get resolved next week. There's a lot to be resolved.
Yeah, well, I don't think we should keep our fingers crossed for getting a whole lot of details about Kymir's past. I think we've got Kymir as he is, and there might be some twists on who he is in that final episode, but I don't think we can go in and expect to complete the Wikipedia page on where Kymir came from. And that's fine, as long as we get a conclusion to this series that makes some sort of sense. It does not have to answer all the questions. So
that's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're about to run out of time, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank you all for joining us for the episode of Podcast Stardust on our discussion of episode 7 of The Acolyte. Make sure that you subscribe to the show so that you can get our reactions to the season finale next week. You think we're going to get an announcement that there's going to be a second season?
I don't know.
Yeah, D23 is next month, so maybe they'll say something then.
There you go.
But so yeah, subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. And I'll also remind you that if you're looking for some of our back episodes beyond the 200 or so that are going to be on your podcatcher, head over to retrozapp.com and you can find all 750, what is this? 54, all previous 753 episodes of the podcast. We've been at it for a while. We've been putting on a lot of shows. We got a lot of things we discuss since 2019. And while you're at Retros App, you can find several other great podcasts covering the MCU, DC, Dune, Star Trek, collecting, Love, Death, and Robots, Animaniacs. It's a great place to hang out for a little bit. And as always, we greatly appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatcher it is that you use, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And we would appreciate if you could share the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. So with that, Jay, and remind everybody what those contacts are and where our other homes on the internet can be found.
Absolutely. And it always blows my mind to think that we've been doing this since 2019. I swear, like the
Mm-hmm.
whole COVID days were like in a weird time vacuum.
Yeah.
But you can definitely connect with us on our socials, which are Instagram, Facebook, and X at Podcast Stardust. And we also have our two YouTube outlets where you can get all of our shows, and that would be the regular YouTube as well as YouTube Music. So head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And if you're in need of some ideas for all things Star Wars, you can head over to one of our many boards over on Pinterest. And if you want to hit us up for some real time chatter, we do have a Discord room on the RetroZap Discord server. So, as Dennis was just talking about, there's tons of shows on the RetroZap family. And so, if you go to our show page, you can hit up the link in our show notes and you can talk to us as well as all of the other plethora of shows that are over there. And also in our show notes is our link to our TeePublic store, where you can get one of 7 different show logo designs on everything from apparel to home goods and pretty much everything in between. And every one of those purchases does help to support the show. So once again, that link is in our show notes. And another thing in our show notes is the link to Saber Masters. So we are still partnering with Saber Masters, where you can pick up your choice of lightsaber. So whether you would like a yellow lightsaber, a red lightsaber, tons of different types of hilts. There's 2-for-1 deals going on, and they are all battle ready sabers and ready for you. So if you do happen to pick one up, make sure that you hit up the code Stardust at checkout, and that will make sure to get you $10 off on your total purchase. And it also does help to support the show. So that is at sabermasters.com. And once again, the link is in our show notes. So what do you got going on, Dennis, with Warp Trails and anything else with your podcasting self?
Sure. So my wife and I are getting ready for the 5th and final season of Lower Decks, which we'll be covering on Warp Trails, which is our podcast devoted to Star Trek. It's exclusive to the RetroZap podcast feed. Best place to find all the episodes right now is over on retrozap.com. Yeah, we've covered everything that's come out on Paramount Plus, whether that's been Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, and Strange New Worlds. We've been talking about all of that there. And if you want to find me talking about something else, I was on a recent episode of Disney with the Ducks talking about some of the fun things you can do on a Disney cruise ship with a fun panel of people. And that was their July 9th show. I don't know what the episode number is off the top of my head, but I had a lot of fun talking to that about that with them over there. So Jay, what do you got going on in cosplay?
Well, as always, you can catch me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I'm over there as 2 different forms of Hera, one from Rebels as well as the Ahsoka series. My signature Ahsoka from Clone Wars seasons 3 through 5, as well as the Fourth Sister Inquisitor from the Kenobi series, and my original concept Mandalorian based on Tahiri Vela from Legends, and tons of other fun stuff. So you never know, you'll find Weird Barbie, maybe a Fae High Queen. So hit me up on j.snipscosplay.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Monday, we'll be getting into recent Star Wars news. And then on Wednesday, we're going to get into some Star Wars comics with a discussion of issues 5 and 6 of Phase 3 of the High Republic from Marvel. So join us for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for listening to episode 754 Podcast Stars, everyone. Have a great weekend. And until next time, may the Force be